Here's Brody Brazil.
I realize I'm a couple days late on this, but I thought it was worth putting together some final Evander Kane comments as it relates to the San Jose Sharks. And there's just a lot of loose ends here, so what I'm about to say may feel a bit disjointed. It may wander back and forth, but that's kind of the whole nature of this entire situation, which I am glad is completely resolved. I'm glad for Evander that it's done. He can be an Oiler. I'm glad for the San Jose Sharks that they can now officially move on and there are no lingering effects of this dispute with the player and the situation, how it unfolded. So let's just kind of begin at the very start of Evander Kane's time in San Jose. Came over in that trade from Buffalo. The Sharks traded only one player and a couple draft picks to the Sabres. And Evander Kane, who was just not working out in Buffalo, came to San Jose. And do you remember how he arrived officially? He was met by Joe Thornton, who was on the IL at that time in late 2018. He picked him up. He picked Evander up at the airport. And you're like, wow, that's a really cool thing. What a nice gesture. What a nice way to enter the team. And Evander responded greatly. His first 17 games as a Shark, 9 goals, 14 points, got his first hat trick of his career, which was hard to believe, right? That had never happened before. And he also played in his first playoff game. So all of that taken care of, and that led to a 7-year, $49 million extension in San Jose. So at that time, you're feeling like, wow, what a catch. What a great opportunity for the Sharks to capitalize on this player who came over. It's going to work out. It really did feel good. I think that's important to remember. And I want to throw this in there too. Again, kind of a wandering thought. You know, and all the times I ever interviewed Evander, talked to him, observed him, whatever, I just want to state this. Like, I never had a bad personal interaction. Now, I'm not his teammate. I never put on the jersey next to him. I never, traveled or practiced or participated. So I might be a bad gauge of this. I might be a bad judge of this, but I'm just here to say I do think it's worth noting. Sometimes I'll come across somebody and instantly it's apparent that there are some things going on or they won't fit or this ain't good. But I just want to say that's my perspective in this. But also, I think it was pretty clear on the inside that there was some turbulence. There were some internal issues with Evander, coaching staff, teammates, and I'm not going to get into all the details. Some are out there, some are reported, some might be more factual than others. But I think as much as any of his former teammates could say things, you could read more into the situation with what they didn't say. The things that were unsaid, the body language, the day that I think they were on the road and it was revealed that he was going to serve a suspension. Was that it? Or there was another time where, the straight faces, the really stiff appearances, they just did not want to talk. And I think a lot of that represented the internal issues between he and his teammates, which he obviously doubted, but the whole of the group basically made it very clear that this was not going to continue him part of the San Jose Sharks. And I also want to say this too. There were a lot of personal matters that came up during this process. I want to leave those entirely private. It's not my place. So yeah, we're not going there, but I want to explain why we're not going there. It's not my place to associate any of that with the hockey stuff. Is there carryover between anybody's personal and professional life? Yeah, sure, there is. But the private stuff, from my perspective, stays private. I think a lot of it was unfortunate when you're talking about a family situation and kids. And let me just say this, as much as I'm glad this professional side is resolved between Evander and the Sharks, I've always said this. I hope the personal side gets equal or greater resolution as well too. So I don't know much about that, because it's not my business, but I definitely want to separate, and I've always wanted to separate the personal matters from the professional matters that we could talk about here. Okay. When it was clear that Evander was not going to be a Shark, he was still part of the franchise, and they probably wanted the opportunity to keep him playing to showcase him for a potential trade, see if there was any chance of that happening. But it was, December of last year. Evander goes to the Barracuda. He plays 8 AHL games, and I think there was a sequence there. If he played a couple, then he didn't go on the road trips, and yeah, this was his first time ever playing minor league hockey. So bus trips, less than 5-star hotels, it was quite the experience, right? And I put on the bottom here, weird times, because you knew this was not a permanent solution or situation for Evander. It's also a place he didn't belong. He got 8 points, 2 goals, and I think it was, those 8 games, or was it 5 games? That might be a typo on the top. I think it was 8 points in 5 games. Anyway, you get the idea here. Small sample size of everything, but weird situation, right? Just an odd circumstance that here he is with the Barracuda. We don't know where it's going to go from here, but this is how it is right now. And so that's the last time he ever put on teal. And then he was with the Oilers, got that opportunity there. So look, in retrospect, and I'll get to how it unfolded here, the resolution, I'm just glad that we are now fully resolved in this situation. That Evander can be with Edmonton, the Sharks can move forward knowing what their situation is, and we'll never know, like all the details of the dispute, of the grievance and the contract violations, and we know some things, but we understand this. The Sharks had to terminate his contract under very specific language, right? Like you can't arbitrarily just say, well, that's it, you're out of here. There must have been some pretty clear-cut things that transpired for this termination to happen. It's not a situation where you can pull a fast one, because if you're a big company and you pull a fast one on somebody and then they challenge it, I mean, you could ultimately pay a stiff and heavy price and reputation and everything that goes along with it. So of all the things that I'm putting together here, I think when you look at the Sharks' perspective, it was probably, plain as day. In ink, on paper, here's a rule, here's a protocol. This was broken, maybe multiple things. Again, I can't get into all the details. I think Evander did acknowledge the fake vaccine card at the beginning of last year. But everything else, which, again, I don't need to dive into every single last detail. My point is the Sharks could not have just said, we don't think you belong here anymore. We're going to move on. We're going to terminate this. They couldn't do that. There was something specific that allowed them to do this. Right? So again, big companies just cannot operate, and the Sharks are a big company. They cannot operate arbitrarily. But speaking of the arbitrator, the schedule and the situation was so very weird. They got together, I think at the end of last year, like 2 weeks after the Oilers season ended. And then there was supposed to be another meeting, but then that got delayed, and it just seemed like it was taking forever. And this is a middle person between the Sharks and Evander and the NHL and the NHLPA, a totally independent person, but it just seemed like there was no dedication to finishing this or resolving this on any reasonable time basis. It seems to me, now, again, I'm not in the room, I'm not part of the phone calls and Zoom calls and whatever else, but it seemed to me like the Sharks were the ones pursuing resolving this, to get it over with, to figure out how their cap situation was going to stand for the upcoming years. Turns out it worked out well, but it didn't seem like the arbitrator was in any hurry, and I heard there were some personal delays and situations. Look, we can understand it, but let's make this thing a pretty start to finish process. Like, let's hurry up here. Like, there was no reason to have this go on for months and months. It seemed a bit unreasonable. So, yeah, the arbitrator situation, which was supposed to be normal, it just took forever. The situation in the schedule was very weird in reverse. So, I mean, Edmonton got a good deal, I think, on Evander Kane. Turns out that they're going to get to keep his contract, right? I mean, if it turned out any other way, there could have been a situation where an arbitrator returned Evander to the Sharks and said his contract was not voided and he's a Shark again. That would have opened up a whole different ball of wax. But Edmonton gets a good deal. 4 years, $20.5 million for Evander, a fresh start for him. And like I said, the contract not voided. So they get to keep moving with a player that they like right now. And the Sharks, it's called a settlement, and it was a settlement, right? But I want to be clear, that usually comes with a negative connotation. And I suppose that the reported $2.5 million that they're going to pay Evander, that's not a small sum of money. That's not an amount of money that they probably wanted to part ways with. But again, this is one of those big corporations operating in a big company way. Sometimes this is the price of doing business. The $2.5 million salary gap is the difference between what the Sharks would have owed him under a higher price point versus what the Oilers are paying him for the next 3 years. Evander had 3 more years under contract in San Jose. So the $2.5 million gap is just going to be paid out by the Sharks, reportedly, to Evander, reportedly, retroactively, under last year's salary cap. So which, by the way, the Sharks were finishing the year $5 million under the cap. It fits. It goes to last year. This is all done. It was expedited. And again, if you're the Sharks, what if this was supposed to fit under next year's cap or the year's cap after that? The Sharks right now were only about $250,000 under the cap. Like, they would have had to have made some changes this year if it needed to fall under this year. But instead, they work it out. So it goes under last year, and all of this was now done last season. The whole situation. They get to move on. There's no more ramifications. They get to be competitive. They get to spend up to the cap. The $2.5 million, quite honestly, I don't know what they were going to spend in legal fees and everything else. If this went on months and months, maybe it was just as cheap to end it now and say, here we go. Again, $2.5 million. Not a small chunk of change by any means. That's a player for a full year. That's a decent NHL player for any year. But again, it's the cost of doing business in this circumstance and situation. So again, that's it. Final Evander Kane video. I'm happy. I'm content to just say that it's over. It was an interesting and unfortunate process, start to finish. And how many times do you ever see this? Where the team's best goal scorer, the team's maybe best offensive player from the prior year is just not welcome back. It goes to show that there were some clear issues that the players and the team made as a group, and they moved on from Evander, and now Evander has moved on, and now the Sharks and everybody get to go their own separate ways. So those are my final comments. Again, I just wanted to kind of bring as much of a level-headed approach as I could, spell it out for you. That is the situation, which is now concluded.